Okay, hello everyone. We're so glad to have you here today, and we'd love to know a little bit about where you are, what your role is in education. So if you just want to tell us in the chat where you're coming to us from and what your role is, we would love to see that information. We're going to take just a moment to let everyone get acclimated and settled, and then we'll get started in just a moment. So just to get this started, I am coming to you from Austin, Texas, home of the University of Texas Longhorns and all the drama that goes with being from the University of Texas. But I'm actually here by way of the University of Colorado. So if anyone here is a buff, please tell me. Would love to know. Okay. So we are very near our start time. If the chat is disabled, you're able to put it in the question box. That's totally fine. You can ask it as a question and we will absolutely accept your responses there while we make sure our chat is up and running the way it's supposed to be. But please do put where you are coming from and your role in that question section, and we will address it there. That's no problem. Okay. So in an effort to honor everyone's time, I'm going to go ahead and get everyone started here today. First of all, hi, welcome to Teamology's first Team Talk webinar of 2023. Today, we're talking about the sustainability of social, emotional, and mental health and wellness of our students post-COVID and post-ESSER funding. Super important topic to be discussing today. I'm Caitlin Kindred, your moderator for today's discussion, and I'm absolutely honored to introduce our panelists that we have here today. So I'm going to start with Dr. Barbara Mullen, who is currently serving as the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services for Cambridge Public Schools. As the Assistant Superintendent, Dr. Mullen works to ensure that equitable practices are at the core of each system throughout CPSD to identify and rectify those longstanding inequities and support opportunities in student outcomes. Before stepping into her current role, Dr. Mullen was supporting Rhode Island school districts as they work toward equitable outcomes for students as the Director of Learning of the Learning Leader Network for the Center for Leadership and Educational Equity. She is the author of Secure Your Oxygen Mask First, Strategies to Prevent Burnout in Special Education Practitioners, and additional digital and print publications. I also have with us today PJ Capozzi, who is the Illinois Superintendent of the Year and a finalist for the National Superintendent of the Year. He is a best-selling author and has written 9 books for various publishers. His work and commentary have been featured on sites such as The Washington Post, NPR, CBS This Morning, ASCD, Edutopia, and the Huffington Post, and he was featured in a Global Leaders Forum think piece alongside the likes of General Petraeus and General McChrystal. He also works in the education department of 3 universities, including within the Ivy League. Of course, now we also have Doug Roberts, who has worked with leading ed tech entrepreneurs and district administrators for almost 20 years. As founder and president of Educational Solutions Consulting, Doug found that there was a barrier between those who run school districts and those who start companies that help school districts. So we partnered with some of the nation's most innovative educational leaders to form IEI to bridge that gap. Doug is a former public high school social studies teacher, a Princeton grad, and an ed tech business development executive who earned his master's in education in teaching and curriculum from the Harvard University Graduate School of Ed. And of course, our amazing host, Lindsay Covert, a former educator turned passionate social entrepreneur. Lindsay is the founder and CEO of the ed tech company Teamology. From roles in K-12 to higher education, she's always focused on creating content and innovative technology solutions to support students' social, emotional, and mental health and wellness. And she and Teamology's work have been recognized and awarded by organizations such as EdTech Insights Magazine, Foremost Under 40, the Education 2.0 Outstanding Leadership Award, Penn State, and most recently a runner-up for South by Southwest EDU. And lastly, there's me. I'm Caitlin. I'm an associate with the EdTech firm First Step Advisors. I'm also the co-host of the CK and GK podcast. I'm a mom of an elementary school kiddo, and perhaps most relevant to this conversation, I'm a recently transitioned 13-year former middle school teacher. I taught math and history, and I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to be here with this amazing panel today. So welcome to all of you. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Caitlin.
Sure. So before we get into the meat of our discussion today, I just want to do some housekeeping. Just a quick reminder that your camera's off and you're muted if you're one of our attendees, but we're still eager to hear from you. So please know that I have with me moderating Jessica, who is a Teamology associate, former educator herself, and also a fellow podcast host. So you'll either hear from myself or Jessica while you're sending in your questions. We know that you'll have lots of questions for our panelists. In fact, I have questions that I've got listed here, and you'll probably see me taking notes during the event. But please do submit them to us. And just so you know, the first 5 participants to submit 3 thoughtful questions will receive a $20 Amazon gift card courtesy of our friends here at Teamology. And with that, let's go ahead and get started for today. So I'm going to start with our supers. Just talk to me about your kids. How are they? Tell us about their social, emotional, and mental health and wellness as you see it right now.
I'll defer to you, Barb.
All right, thank you. So I think one of the things I want to say is, I think there was a movie, The Kids Are All Right, or The Kids Aren't All Right, something like that. But I think one of the things that there was this just really sense of urgency around, like, the children are not okay. And many of the children are okay. They return to us with their bright faces, and they actually helped us adults kind of come back into the swing of things and find a sense of normalcy. But for the students who are still struggling, they're really struggling. And so I think what I'm seeing with our students who are struggling, who were either hit hardest by some of the conditions of the pandemic or schooling that was not in the building, I think some of the things I'm seeing is, yes, that adjustment and transition, but then also the just communal ripple effect in their own lives, and really having the skills to be able to adjust to that. So not just being reactive to some of the things that have happened to them or to their condition or in their communities, but really just having something of that magnitude happen and not really having had the opportunity, or what I call like the lab space, which school is, to build those social emotional learning skills to really respond to them. And so we're seeing some of that in the classrooms right now and in the buildings.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Barb said. I've said about a lot of different facets of the pandemic. I don't think it changed as much as people would like to think. I think it revealed a bunch. And I think it's kind of done the same thing with with our kids, meaning that I think some of our kids that had some problems that may have been going under the radar or unearthed that we might not have been aware of, I think have become much more pronounced. But I think for a good number of our kids, like Barb said, like things have gone on. I would say overwhelmingly, the biggest trend that we have seen in our district, and again, I think we're a little bit different than most districts, like we've had zero evidence of learning loss. We're very fortunate in those ways. If you asked our teachers, I think they would say with a good deal of certainty that our kids' maturity level has been impacted, meaning that the average sixth grader is acting like an average, second semester fourth grader, or whatever the case happens to be, and that the socialization that was missed during the pandemic is manifesting in several different ways. Now, not necessarily manifesting in terms of increased SEL need, but just it's manifesting in a way that teachers that have become accustomed or used to a certain way a certain age group behaves is now having to adjust to a different way that they are behaving. That is what we are seeing the most. So again, to synthesize, I think it's revealed and kind of amplified what we already knew or were already experiencing. And then I think we are seeing some like a maturity lag, for lack of a better term.
That's an interesting point. I said I was recently transitioned, and I know I taught middle school, and I came back into the classroom and really noticed that, my students, there's that very real transition period right around fourth quarter, where all of a sudden you're not teaching seventh graders anymore. They're eighth graders in a seventh grade classroom, and they missed that whole period. And then a year after that in a lot of cases. So I would echo what you're saying, that does seem like what we're seeing. Do you feel like our educators are equipped to deal with that right now?
So I think it's interesting. I think equipped, quite possibly, right? Like I think that schools are kind of built for this in many ways. Like we're built to close gaps, we're built to identify issues, we're built to treat them. Willing or excited about doing it, I think might be a different answer. Just simply because when you get, as you mentioned, like in seventh grade, you had these things that you expected and these types of problems that you were typically used to dealing with. Now you take that entire, skill set that you've developed over 1, 2, 10, 15 years and now require a different one. It doesn't mean that skill set doesn't exist. It just might not be that you want to deploy it quite as easily or readily as you were used to doing something else.
Yeah, and I think to also echo what PJ has said around it revealing things about that may have been hidden. I think a lot of the skill set that's needed to teach social emotional learning competencies, the self-awareness, all of those different areas, the relationships, those are skills that is just good teaching. Like you embed that in your practice anyway. You create and design your lessons around helping students develop those skills anyway. And so whereas some educators feel super comfortable with just delivering content and saying like, hey, this is the math calculation, get it or don't. And there are no opportunities for students to exercise those skills. Some have that embedded all the way through. So then when there is really a need to amplify that in their instruction, some educators feel like ready, like, yes, I always do morning meeting. I always have kids have discourse about a concept and build community and and some are not, and they really need to do that in order for kids to build that maturation process. And so it just kind of depends on what teachers like pedagogically we're doing already, because we have always said SEL is not another thing that you're teaching, you're embedding it. And so it's important more than ever, but it's kind of revealed if some educators weren't doing that already.
Barb wins. We had a bet off the table who could work pedagogically into a sentence first, and she nailed it. So
are we playing educational term bingo? Because
we can't tell you. We can't tell you. But when it happens, you'll see a little hand signal, and that'll be.
Oh, goodness. Okay. So I'm really curious, Lindsay, what are you seeing in terms of what we've discussed so far, just student issues and how teachers feel as they address these?
Yeah, so I echo everything I'm hearing Barb and PJ talk about. Coming at this from a provider perspective, I'm very fortunate to be invited and welcomed into schools and get to see classrooms. And I have one experience in particular that I'm thinking about in terms of a kindergarten classroom where the principal was teaching. This was back in October because the teacher had walked out. She wasn't prepared. When we think about social emotional, when we think about that maturity and the expectations around students today, we have a kindergarten teacher that wasn't prepared to teach a class that wasn't at the level she expected the students to be. So I think that was very revealing to me. And we have since learned, I think at least 2 more teachers have left that building. So maybe that's for a different conversation, but I do think it is a different time as far as expectations from our educators, from what we're hearing. The feelings of overwhelmment. I think those issues of course were there as a former educator and counselor myself. We at the time, I left education over a decade ago and almost 800 kids on my caseload. And, I wasn't short of all of the emergencies and all of the things that counselors are dealing with today. But I think what we have kind of been, what we've learned and what we're feeling is that that couple of years of lack of socialization, as PJ was talking about, that really starts to expose some things within the classroom setting. And it does kind of force us to prioritize things, I think, a little bit differently. And so that's where I think from the perspective of a provider and kind of just trying to make sure that we're supporting districts and teachers and students as best we can. And we have just seen a pretty significant shift in the need for not only support in terms of social, emotional, and mental health, but in the need for, like, how does this work when you speak, PJ, to a 6th grader kind of coming, into the classroom at more of a 4th grade level? What does that mean? I think more systemically as we move forward. So there's a lot probably more in terms of question than there are answers right now from what I'm seeing in my world. But certainly I think you also have innovation and opportunity, I think, at the moment, and the willingness to try maybe more things than maybe what educators would have before the pandemic.
So speaking of that, I'm going to kick it back over to Barb and PJ. What sorts of programs and plans have you rolled out to support our students who are needing that additional social, emotional, mental health, just support in general, right? What's happening, and how do you foresee that need changing in the next couple of years?
Ladies first.
Okay. All right. Thank you, PJ. So a few things. I think one of the things that we've done is partner. We've done like a lot of different ways with district universal support. So, had a blanketed kind of teletherapy access for students and our staff. So we brought in a solution provider to be able to provide that support where just coming out of COVID, cues to be able to see a clinician were in the weeks and multiple weeks. So being able to just say, hey, if you have an opportunity to get consent with families and you're able to access care very soon, much sooner than you might if you were trying to go through an insurance provider or someone else. Other things we've done is actually think about our master schedule and change up at the secondary level specifically to provide almost an additional advisory block. Don't ask me where we found that time from. We have time fairy to find an additional advisory block to really think about like another what I need, but it was focused a little bit more on that post-secondary planning, some social emotional learning, tying that in, and then really giving opportunity for students to build community with small group clinicians, workshops and sessions for students who had like a more tiered approach to needing support. And then the last thing was that we brought the community in. So we brought community folks in who weren't like providers or didn't have a business per se, but they were there. They saw the kids in other ways. They went to church with them. They, were at the rec center with them. They were authentic community members who many of our students already have relationships with. But we said, come to the place where they're at in school, send folks there so that sense of belonging and identity was translated into the spaces where kids sometimes felt the most isolated, which could be during the instructional day. So those were 3 ways that we really thought about shifting that support and care immediately.
So one of the things that Barb said that really stuck out to me is that they did everything, it seems like, with both students and staff in mind. And so I think it goes back to one of the points that you're making earlier when Lindsay was speaking, is that we have to take care of our adults to take care of our kids. I mean, not to promote Barb's book for her, but like that's really the title of her book, right? Like you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people. And so I think that's a lot of the approach that we went like double down, triple down on our staff wellness. What are we doing to take care of our people? Additionally, we're small rural, which I think brings in a handful of different complexities. One, the teacher shortage is very real in some parts of the country, and that's impacting us at this point. So we have to either figure out like a really difficult, complex calculus problem to recruit teachers, or we can really double down on retaining the ones we have and treating them well. So that's what we've focused on from the adult side, because if our adults are in a good place, they can take care of our kids. Second thing we did is we doubled down kind of on what we were doing pre-pandemic, right? Because the problems haven't shifted. They may have been amplified. And so for us, it was making sure that what we were doing was continuing to work, and in some cases adding staff to that, right? Like, because the program is the program, but the staff that's implementing it is incredibly vital. And the third thing for us, which is really like, it's almost an everyday conversation with different departments and different entities. It's really hard for us to have community partners, because there's not really any partners to be had. So we are working really hard to find wraparound services for our kids in all aspects of wellness, including SEL, but in terms of physical wellness as well, because the same problems that befall all students throughout our country, I believe, right? Like, I don't know that any district is immune from this. It just is very difficult in small rural to find partners and to connect with. So in some ways, when I hear some of my colleagues in more urban settings talk about partnership A and partnership B, like, I'm very jealous, not on behalf of me, but on behalf of our kids, because we just simply don't have partners to find. We're creating and linking up with partners 40, 50, 60, 70 miles away just to try to do some things for our kids. So for us, we didn't really deviate from strategy. If anything, we just kind of doubled down on taking care of our staff, ensuring that we had more staff to implement the programs we already had in place, and to look in terms of looking at the whole student in all types of wellness to ensure that we were doing whatever we could to create wraparound services for kids.
You're bringing up a good point. And I think that one of the things that I'm hearing you say is there's a very real need for technology in this way, in this support system that we have to build in, especially for someone who is in a rural district. You need to have ways to access the support that you need. And so I'm going to ask a question, excuse me, the kitten who wants to come up and say hello. I'm going to ask this question of Doug, and just curious, how is innovation supporting some of the emotional, social, mental health needs of our students? And do you see funding for this coming from the ESSER funds that are available right now?
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here with such a great group of folks. So, I've sitting where I sit, putting innovative founders, CEOs, and solution provider execs in a room with people like PJ and Barbara and their colleagues from around the country. I get to kind of watch it's like when you're sitting on a beach and you can see a big wave coming offshore. I can see the next acronym. It's always an acronym, right? SEL. I can see that acronym offshore, the big wave. I can see it far off in the distance, because the first company kind of trickles in and says, we're seeking to be the first SEL provider, and everyone goes, what is SEL? Because to these folks, like, when you're running a school district, obviously every ounce of your being is trying to look after the social and emotional well-being of every kid in your care, right? That's just in our DNA as educators, and we don't need to read a paper to know that that's what we have to do. We don't need a ed tech CEO to tell us that, right? Like, but it's just kind of how we talk about it and how things get packaged. And this, there was a push toward tech being more kind of cognizant of the social emotional learning needs in districts, and there were specific solutions that came out. Started with kind of really targeting groups like students with autism, students with special needs, and then became kind of more of a general ed focus. And then this pandemic hits at the same time, and all of a sudden we're asking our school districts to do so much more than we used to ask of them. And like, these folks were the only people kind of up and running, without really taking a break, maybe some virtual school throughout that whole process. And that caused a lot of really rapid innovation to have to get put in place as they tried to kind of solve problems. And it created an opportunity for companies that wanted to support as kids go through a social emotional crisis, there's an opportunity to kind of put solutions in place to try to meet those needs. And I want to, we're now kind of on the other side of that, like that wave has crashed on the beach. And now we're at the part of the story where people are starting to question the word social emotional learning. Like Ed Week Market Brief had a piece out, was it yesterday morning, about how SEL is a bad word for some. It implies something less than academic rigor to some. It's been attacked by people, in cable news and whatnot. So like the truth is that an educator knows that he or she's got to look after the social emotional well-being of students, and tools that can help you do that are always going to be welcome. It's great that we now have a series of tools that are specifically, and I think it's not that they're attacking the problem of social emotional awareness, because most educators, at least come in there, they get into this because they want to help kids with that piece. It's more the stuff that teachers don't have time for, or don't have, where we just don't have the capacity. Things like screening. That was not like, we had a basic course we were learning to be teachers about how to kind of, how to try to kind of bring in kind of students, meet students where they are, understand what their context might be, and what kind of mental and emotional things that might be baggage they might be bringing to class. But no one taught me how to kind of look for the warning signs of a kid being in crisis beyond the sort of really basic big stuff, right? The mandated reporter stuff. But now there's a whole bunch of tech out there that can help educators look for or deploy screening tools that can quickly be given to every kid to self-assess. That's groundbreaking stuff. And it does not require me to become a mental health professional. I can keep being a fourth grade teacher or a social studies teacher, and this tool can do that screening piece. And then someone who has the expertise on staff, school psych, counselor, et cetera, can look at the data and go try to figure out how we get things pointed to that kid. Those are the kinds of solution plays I've seen our districts react strongly to. I think there's a ton of room there are a bunch of people writing curriculum around and kind of coaching and PD for helping teachers get better at the social emotional work, and that's always going to be welcome. But there are a lot of those. I think the things I'm seeing districts look for are ways to deal with the fact that, unlike a hospital, they don't have a whole team of mental health professionals at the ready. Dr. Mullen talked about it earlier, how kids were getting into queues to get access to medical and mental health services, and not, but telehealth stepped in to try to help make that connection happen faster. And I think it's interesting. The tools that I'm seeing districts get most interested in are those that kind of operationalize some of this stuff and provide access to things that, your typical kind of like well-to-do upper middle class family just takes for granted, but in a district with, kind of diverse socioeconomic status and needs are harder to find. And those are the kinds of things I've seen people looking out for. But I want to finish up with this little point about the social emotional learning buzzword. You guys were talking buzzwords before. I do think you can potentially do harm to your effort if you use that buzzword ad nauseum. And you might want to think about, there are all kinds of ways that people are talking about it: workforce skills, grit. I think everybody's okay talking about, like, let's try to figure out how to help kids with mental health. But I think the buzzword is kind of on its last legs.
Interesting. So just these programs, these screeners that are coming out, how are schools using ESSER funds to pay for these programs that we're seeing? I mean, Barb and PJ, you can also speak to this too. Where is this ESSER funding going? Is it going towards these programs? Is it going towards staffing, as you mentioned earlier? Because this is a lot to take in. If there's this new wave of technology, how are we putting all this together inside the district?
I can jump on that one, since financially speaking. So again, I think ESSER funding, as it should, followed students in particular, and then it also kind of had weighted factors for different potential risk factors. So some districts received enough money they could do major building projects on it, right? Like, so they could do HVAC work and modernize things, and then other districts didn't. And then I feel like there's a bunch of districts around my size, which I think is about the average in the country. And so we didn't receive enough money to do any type of major building project. So you're stuck with this pot of money, which is amazing, right? Because you don't typically get just a windfall of money. So everyone used the money at first to open up schools, right? And so we used whatever it took to open up schools, but then typically there was still this leftover pot. And so rule one of like becoming a superintendent is you never spend grant money on rotational costs. So things are going to cost year over year. You never want to do that because it's not sustainable. So we didn't, right? So you do all the things that would be like the one-time purchases and improvement of technology that might be a once in a decade purchase, all of those types of things. But then you had some money left. Like for us, we still had some money left over. So then it became like for our conversation shifted. And I went away from we're never, ever, ever spending grant money on things that might be residual rotational costs to saying, this is our chance to be innovative. This is our chance to take a shot on something as long as we're willing to be disciplined and measure the return on investment, and then also be willing to look at other programs we've already been using to continue to measure the return on investment, because at some point something is going to have to give. But we have this once in probably a generation opportunity to do things that in a district like mine that's small, rural, and relatively broke, to do some really cool, innovative stuff on behalf of kids. And so I think the money is going in a myriad of places. So just speaking for us, like there, yes, some is on software and on supports for kids. Some is on staffing, very little on staffing. Some is on small building projects. Some is on small HVAC. So some is on technology. So it's all over the place. But I will say that I think a lot of people broke their cardinal rule of never spending money on a rotational software cost that would be an annual fee with grant money, because you got in situations like we did where there was, hey, we have this pocket of money that was left that is substantive and we can do some cool stuff, but not big enough to do all that other stuff. And then we got into the opportunity to make some really interesting choices.
Yeah, and I will echo what PJ said about, right, really thinking about not supplanting the work or the things that we know we cannot sustain after we go off of this cliff, as we call it. There were some FTEs or some staff that were hired with exactly what PJ said, this very clear methodology that we were going to evaluate the impact effectiveness. I think the other thing that we thought about back in line with like thinking about educators was really thinking about what are the things that help make their jobs not easier, but help them feel more efficacious in doing it. So they also were impacted. They were also feeling certain ways. And I mean, I will be the first one to say it, like there were some times where just adding, you know, as we were doing collective bargaining, being able to think about ways that we could support educators in reopening way. I mean, those are all real pieces of it. And so being able to say, we've got this in our general fund and we've got ESSER fund right now, we can actually use some of this in the general fund to do some things we want to do administratively that maybe we just couldn't do. And we can do it this year because we know this is a 3 or 4 year contract. So we want to, you know, so we wanted to really think about ways that adults like to be shown appreciation, which is not like a pizza party. So we wanted to be thoughtful about that with ESSER. I mean, we get them pizza, but we wanted to think about what could we add to base? What could we add to stipending some folks who are doing a lot of the lifting, like our clinicians and providers who, when family members were passing in COVID, were the first ones to respond. You know, so we thought about different ways that we could really put money where our mouth was, but also say like, and this is not a thing that's happening all the time, but this is something that we can do because we know that there was a lot that you gave during that time. And there's a lot of support and different capacity and skills that you're going to need moving forward, because there's just an expectation of how we support our students moving forward that will probably be kind of in perpetuity. And so we want you to have a different set of skills. So we're going to invest in that out the gate.
First of all, there's questions that are coming in right now, and I just want to pause this just for a moment to say thank you, those of you who are sending in your questions. Please continue to do that. Remember that we do have a gift card for those of our participants who send in 3 thoughtful questions. But I'm curious, and this seems like a follow-up, but Doug and Barb and PJ, how what is the conversation around what happens when these ESSER funds are gone?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to channel my friend Jess Gartner, the founder CEO of Allaview, who help districts and educators with budgeting in real time. And she has been beating the drum that, this is, and really helping our districts with messaging, messaging to their boards, to their communities, sort of coaching the board on how to be communicating this out to the public. Basically, this is, this was not, we have to counteract the media narrative that this is a bunch of, free money that districts are kind of, like giving themselves treasure baths with, and spending like drunken sailors and all the other stuff we've seen in the national media. This is kind of filling a gap. Like the idea that our schools were underfunded around mental health services and tools for assessing, whether kids were feeling okay and feeling like, they wanted to, feeling in a spot where they're in danger. That shouldn't be something that, is a quote unquote windfall from the federal government. This is something that we should be doing. And so if the ESSER funds do disappear entirely when the cliff hits in the fall of 24, then we're going to have to go figure out how to make some of these services happen, and have difficult conversations about budget. Or but the idea is that this is probably more like how we should be funding our schools. It's a drop in the bucket when you look at the overall funding of a district, because you gotta remember that 90% of most district budgets is people, is staff, because you have, it's a human enterprise, and so you need a lot of people on staff. And so am I optimistic heading into a presidential election year that that there's going to be a big appropriation for another tranche of this money? No, but stranger things have happened. I think a lot of people, regardless of who you vote for in elections, I think a lot of people like knowing that if their kid's in trouble, there are more resources at school to help their kid. And so if we can, which is why we and stuff we put out in terms of our content, et cetera, we just want people to know about the good things happening in districts with these funds, so that we can take away the politicization of things like social emotional learning and just talk about, that kids are getting support and that teachers are getting better at providing that kind of support, and hope that helps, communities when it depends on your community. Some places you vote on your school budget each year, the public vote, some places the school board votes, some places a city council gives a budget to a district, but whomever's in charge of those purse strings, we'll see that some of these districts have taken some risks with ESSER money that they might not have been able to take otherwise, in terms of trying out new things. And some of those things are going to need to be figured out how they can be put into the annual operating budget. But I don't think anybody who's got any kind of fiscal planning chops has, put out a bunch of things that they're going to have to rip away once the funding disappears, because that would be career suicide for a super, or for elected board members, right? Like, if you don't want to get elected again, then fine, go give everyone stuff and then disappoint them. I think a lot of people have been making plans to spread these funds out as much as possible, like Dr. Capozzi said earlier.
So then, speaking about the sustainability piece, this is back to Barb and PJ, is technology considered part of this sustainable solution long-term to help with these needs that you're seeing?
I would say that it has to be for me, again, given my context. So the thing that I talked about, no matter what topic, if we're talking about achievement, or we're talking about, like, I repeat over and over again, like, zip code shouldn't determine quality and access. And when it comes to social, emotional, and mental health supports, it 1000% does right now. And so if the only way that we can sustainably mitigate the fact that our kids are at a disadvantage when it comes to that in a small rural community is by leveraging technology, then that's certainly what we have to do. So I think it's probably the only sustainable solution in my unique context. I can't speak to what large urban might be with all kinds of different partners or whatever the case happens to be. But in my context, I think it certainly is the only sustainable solution.
And I would echo that. I think I've had the opportunity to work and lead in a couple of different contexts, and it's never any different. Any type of technology that allows you to be more nimble and efficient, especially in your district infrastructure and systems, to be more responsive to your stakeholders, your students, your parents, your board members, your educators, is going to help you be a more sustainable and solvent organization and more impactful. I've seen in large urban districts where people are still like hand stamping payroll checks. Like, why are we doing that? I need to be investing my energy in responding to families and in doing some strategic problem solving in addressing student achievement and growth and opportunity, not spending 15 minutes hand signing payroll checks. So those are the types of things that, and yes, they still happen in places, you know, because people, and I mean, just a lot of different things. I don't say people, but a lot of different reasons. So that's one kind of example around district efficiencies and systems where innovation is absolutely, I wouldn't even call it innovation. I would just say bringing a system up to speed, right? Bringing a system into where the rest of enterprise thinking is, and operation and organizational efficiency is already. But I think in terms of instruction, technology has a place, and technology will always be there in terms of being able to support students. And it will, as long as it's done thoughtfully, and as long as we're always keeping students at the center and teacher development at the center and supporting them, it's going to be necessary, especially if you think about the different ways that students need to access learning. It's going to always be necessary. So I think there's going to be a need for us to always be thoughtful in how we're integrating that.
So just speaking as someone who spent a lot of time in the classroom, again, 13 years in the classroom, and who also did the post-quarantine teaching, there's been some pushback, and this is anecdotal certainly, but it's not, I mean, I'm hearing it in other circles too, that there's just some pushback from educators when it comes to ed tech after virtual learning, right? There is some, like, you know, we used iPads for a year, we're gonna not use iPads so much this time around. So I'm gonna direct it over to Lindsay. What are some of the big concerns that you've seen when it comes to innovation, and particularly the new elephant in the room, right? The new thing of AI in the classroom and in education?
Yeah, so I think the good news is actually, you know, as Barb just recently mentioned, there is a growing interest in using technology in the right ways, right? And so technology that is geared towards solutions that are going to enhance learning, that are going to mitigate some of the efforts and you know, accelerate some other efforts. I would say prior to the pandemic, we started building what is Technology Team Talk. We're just days away from launching. And 4 years ago, when we first started having conversations with stakeholders and we did focus groups with teachers, talking about artificial intelligence was terrifying for the people we were talking to. It was eyes wide open, robots are coming, how dare you even consider this in education? There were some pretty rough, I would say, meetings that I walked out of. But I'm a firm believer in doing what's best for kids, and if we do what's best for kids, then we're going to be, you know, we're going to be doing what's best for the teachers and the people that are trying to advocate for kids. And so we also talk to kids. So, and from those conversations, I think what we learned was that we have a digital generation. We have kids that are comfortable with technology. And what are we going to do about that? And how has that impacted and affected relationships? And so I would say in the last several weeks, people are much more willing and open to talking about AI in education. And those conversations, I think, are changing, and they need to, and they should be, because I think there are people that have solutions and that are really wanting to help, you know, in the right ways. And when I say that, I mean really taking care of the data and understanding data security and where does, you know, how do all of these things play out? And the one thing I can say for AI, it's really good at identifying themes and patterns and data. And that is something that can enhance and quickly help kids get support they need faster. And I'm speaking to that more from a social emotional perspective. But I will emphasize this, and forever emphasize this. It doesn't mean that you take people out of the loop. It doesn't mean that those professionals aren't working right alongside that artificial intelligence. And I think that's critical to the success of any innovation that's including artificial intelligence. So I'm watching it. I'm seeing how effective it can be. And yeah, I'm just a strong believer in making sure that we're balancing this in the right ways. And do I think all administrators and teachers are ready for it? No. I think it's going to take some early adopters and some people that are willing to take risk when they see that the reward is, faster and more efficient support for students.
Doug, you look like you have something you need to add to that.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my little theme about buzzwords. I think, the everyone freaked out because New York City banned Chat GPT this week, and then, or last week, whatever. And then there was like a series of, and I only focus on the educator ones, but series of posts by Soups and others I know about Chat GPT and how it has, it will have impacts in public education. I get why teachers are, probably, largely not wanting Chat GPT to enter their classrooms. At least not without some control over it and some ability to kind of tell when it's entering or not. I think people would be wise to not focus on the artificial intelligence piece. That's a buzzword I would kind of leave out. But the idea that, because what is artificial intelligence? I think there is a real technical term for what it actually is. But in the 2000s, districts all started implementing tools that would let kids respond to formative assessments, and then we get data about how kids are doing. Could that be seen as artificial intelligence? It's something that's just operationalizing work that used to be a teacher reviewing a piece of paper and writing on it, right? We're just these tools are trying to save time, and that's what these mental health and social emotional screening tools like Teamology and others are doing. And if they happen to be driven by what is considered by computer scientists to be artificial intelligence or not is less important than what the outcome is, and how are we saving the district time and creating efficiency so we can serve more kids.
Do you, just as a follow-up to that, do you feel like AI in general, but specifically Chat GPT, do you feel like this is a game changer in education? Is there going to be a lot more to, yes.
10 years ago, I sat in so many panels at various conferences and read whatever we read then, Twitter posts, linked, I can't remember, so long ago, about how video playlists were going to change how we teach math. Guess what? My kid is learning, pre-algebra on paper worksheets. So she can go find a video if she wants it, but the idea that this new thing, we're kind of lemmings in education. And if some kind of wealthy philanthropist decides this is the next coolest thing and wants to either put money behind it or just put, political or social media capital behind it, we all must now do video playlists. And video playlists are a fine thing, but they did not change how we were going to teach math. I think those of us who've been around a couple minutes knew that was not going to be the case. But it's add another great potential tool to the quiver, another arrow in the quiver, right? And I think Chat GPT or any other AI tool is just another tool, and we should chill.
So then, Lindsay, I'm just curious, how can we, there is a lot of talk around Chat GPT and AI in general, and I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about what it can and cannot do. So how can we reassure educators that these innovative products can be an extension of the work that they're doing and not just, a replacement? It's not the self-checkout line at the grocery store. It's something that's actually going to help you do your job. So what do we do there? Yeah.
So I think the way you describe that is exactly appropriate. It's an extension of the work that you're doing. And I think there's some education that has to be done in terms of helping teachers understand what this means and what it doesn't mean. And that's, I think, all part of how this will unravel. I agree, going back to Doug's point, you hear these acronyms every year, every other year, there's a new one. AI just, I think for people, there's some misunderstandings about it. If you don't fully know what the solution is, AI is everywhere. It's been everywhere for quite some time. And a lot of it, we don't even think about. So it's a super broad description. And so I think it's just, like I said, I think it's a better opportunity for us to really take some time and educate about this. And districts have to make good decisions that they feel comfortable about. And unfortunately, there are going to be some providers that aren't doing it in the safest ways. So it's really important that there's some diligence behind the effort in ensuring that the partner that you're working with is qualified and doing the right things.
Can I jump in real quick? When Lindsay said the word extension, it's interesting because it's probably the correct word, but in my head, in the flow chart, it's completely different. So all of this work is precursor work. And then the human that's the expert can then leverage all of these tools to do their job better. So when I think extension, I think that's the last thing. Like, that's just the way my brain works as I imagine it. As long as we keep the human as the last thing that then is using whatever the AI is, or if whatever the data, so like say Teamology kicks out some data, then the human gets to work. It just cuts out 10 of the steps that the human used to have to take. And so for me, it's very important when I try to, educate either my staff or other staffs about it. This is just cutting out the middle. You're no longer the middleman. It's creating tech or AI as the middleman. So then you can be more efficient and effective in using your genius to then produce the results that you want to.
I love that perspective. I think that that's the way that you're going to sell educators on it, right? Because we all know you can have a training on something, but if your teachers are going to sit there and grade papers while you're doing it, which I may or may not have been guilty of doing myself, it doesn't matter, right? They're not going to use it. And if it's another acronym, they're not going to care about it. And so I think that you have to sell it in that manner as this is not going to replace you. This is not going to do your job for you. This is going to help your job when you get to it. It's going to do the screening work that we need it to do, and make everything else easier for you so that you can be more effective and you can be more efficient in what you're up to.
And I think the last thing I would just add to that conversation is that the work that Doug does so well is connecting what happens when that classroom door closes and teachers have autonomy, right? We're in the buildings, we're looking, we're doing instructional walks, classroom walks, we're looking at output and outcomes, but the input when that door closes and that instructional time is happening, teachers can decide, yes, put the Chromebooks away, pull out the Basil, pull out the worksheet, or open the Chromebook, or do this. And there has to be that sense of, again, efficacy I talk about with using the solution with fidelity to see the intended outcome that providers know or believe or feel or have gotten those results and impact in other places. And so connecting folks who think that then they've got the next acronym. I mean, I'm not going to diss the acronym. If you think that it's going to help children, then come on with all the alphabet soup of programs. But you need to have the end user in mind, and that goes for education technology solution providers. That goes for Samsung. I always tell them, I don't have to work at Apple, but you better not design an iPhone without how I'm going to use it in mind. And so I really encourage and implore both educators and developers to be in the same room when that inception is happening, so that we can really champion those things that have impact, especially in a field and area like supporting student wellness, educator wellness, so that we can make that through line between how the solution is going to make your practice stronger and the impact for children better.
Okay, thank you. I think all of that is amazing. I do have a question here that I want to pose to the group, and this is from Sarah, and she asks, has anyone used a digital SEL screener in a meaningful way? Once the data was analyzed, did you have the staff to support the interventions that were needed?
So for us, we have kicked the tires on a bunch of them and trying to find the one that fits kind of our unique needs the most. And just transparently, we've worked with Teamology a lot and continue to work through their iterations. So for us, it's been, we don't want to abandon what we've been doing, right? So there's, I would imagine that in this space, there are plenty of high quality providers. It's finding the provider that fits the unique context of what we have going on. And I think that sometimes that's what's missing, right? Like we find the next coolest thing in education, then we dump the money into it because it's a really cool program. And it may be a really cool program, just not for us. And so one of the things I would say that like our district does well, or what's made us successful, is we do less better. And that's kind of one of the mottos we live by. So for us, it's figuring out, we don't want something that's going to be redundant. We want something that's going to synergize with what we're already doing. And we haven't found it perfectly at this point.
I would just echo that. Many of our screeners are observational, and then some of them are self-reported for students in the higher grades. And I think that benefits, but I also think that there is more opportunity to collect other pieces of data in different ways. So sometimes screening for the skill and not necessarily for intervention support. I think the function of why we're screening students for social emotional learning really matters. So if we're trying to do some preventative kind of intervention support to screen if students are in need of mental health support, that looks very different than if we're just trying to say like, hey, do kids really have a good grasp on advocating for themselves or working in community? That looks very different. And so we have one because of the very, very real need to make sure we're connecting kids with services and clinicians. But then we have other ways of screening for those 5 competencies throughout the year.
And then Caitlin, can I just add, I mean, I'm just clearly coming at this from a provider's perspective, but I do think it's really important when you're looking at screenings that, you know, I'm envisioning that maybe the question is coming from, so we put all this information out there to these kids and then we get all the information back, and how in the world do we ever meet the needs of all of the student issues that are coming through? So I think there's a lot of great products that do like screenings well, but then might be almost burdening or adding stress to the district if they don't have something else in place that they can help and support the school with. So I do think it's kind of looking for products that provide some guidance after you get that screening data. So is there a way that you know, that's a partnership that is not just kind of expecting that the staff is able, you know, or has the capacity to meet all the needs that are coming through the system. So there are tools and products out there, hint, hint, but just be careful about that, because I understand the question, and I certainly understand the frustration if you've heard of experiences like that with districts.
Just to jump in though, this is to I think large to what Doug's been talking about in terms of waves. When benchmarking in assessments that became a thing like 15 years ago, right? Because that, like, it's been that long. There was a whole slew of new jobs that had to be created as a result to start to manage that data, start to implement that data, start to help teachers understand what it meant when we were looking at either RIT scores or whether we're a star district, whatever, you know, when you're using like that data, just because we don't know exactly how to use it yet, or we might need additional support, like, it's very important to me we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Terrible expression, but like that data is still really good data. The same way that the RIT scores are really good data, even if we didn't know what to do with them the first 3 years. That is just a matter of retrofitting the system to make sure it works, so you can start to make the right decisions on the back end.
So that's a very interesting point, and I think that I think that it's like anything else, right? You have to vet every product that you look into as a solution for whatever you need. And so just, there are case studies that people can look to find effective tools that will work as SEL screeners, certainly. I do have a comment from someone in our audience. Terry says, I don't have a question, but I do want to know that, or I do want to share that the JFK 21st CCLC program in Erie, PA is excited to collaborate with Teamology. So that's a really cool thing. And I'm sure that, again, PJ's doing one of these. I'm sure he can share some information, but that, I mean, it is worth looking into what schools have adopted in order to make those informed decisions as you move forward. Okay, so it looks like I'm going to have some winners to announce for those gift cards that Teamology is ready to give away. And we're going to pull those together. But before we do that, I do want to share some additional information with you about Teamology's future programming. So we'll go ahead and get that up. There we go. And Lindsay, I'm going to have you speak to this for us.
Yeah, so we just wanted to take a quick 30 seconds. We are in the process of pushing out what we're calling a showcase program with schools and districts right now. Just really looking to partner with districts that are looking for some innovative solutions and are in need of some support around social, emotional, and mental health. So Jessica Green's contact information is down below. She can put that, I guess, in the Q&A. I feel like I'm seeing that maybe the chat function wasn't really working very well throughout this, so I apologize for that. But feel free to reach out if you have any interest in learning more. We'd be happy to talk with anybody that has any questions.
Okay, so really quickly, I want to make sure that I announce those winners because they've been so patient waiting. But Terry and Sarah, thank you so much. You guys are our winners for our gift cards today, so that's really great. In closing, I do want to thank our amazing panelists, Barbara, PJ, Doug, and Lindsay. Thank you so much for all of the insights that you've shared with us today about the sustainability of these programs post-ESSER and how important they're going to be moving forward. If you are looking to engage with myself or with any of today's panelists, you can find us all on LinkedIn. We've got Twitter handles or any other way you'd like to communicate. Feel free to just flash your phone up on the screen and you can find us there. I'm sure all of us are searchable as well on these platforms, I would imagine, yes. So that's another option as well. And just again, we want to honor your time. So from all of us at the team here at Teamology, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you soon, and we're hoping that you'll join us for the next Teamology Team Talk. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.